I had never heard of the Authority before the announcement of this movie, so I read the first 12 issues to get a sense of things, then supplementing that with a lot of Wikipedia and other such sources. But in the 3 short stories covered by those early issues, it basically always boiled down to an enormous generic force attacking multiple major cities at once. And none of the 3 major villains from there really stood out to me. So I don't have any specific ideas of which story they'll be adapting, and I'll only try to cast the original lineup. No villains or side characters. As a brief history, Stormwatch was a team of heroes created by Jim Lee. They were an elite force of superheroes funded and sanctioned by the UN to intervene in international crises. However, Stormwatch wasn't selling well, and when Warren Ellis took over for Volume 2, he introduced new characters and concepts, then had the majority of the old team decimated by xenomorphs in a crossover comic. The remaining characters were spun off into the Authority. When announcing this new DC universe, Gunn described this team as one who believes the world is completely broken, and the only way to fix it is to take things into their own hands. Whether that means killing people, destroying heads of state, changing governments, you know, whatever they want to do to make the world better. And based on the writing and themes of these comics, and the way Gunn described their group dynamic, it's pretty well a guarantee it'll be R-rated. This is a rough and tumble group who gets their hands dirty. They have an assortment of love triangles and casual hookups going on within the group, and are known to curse their way through some pretty bloody messes. We already know this group is being introduced, or at least a portion of them, in Superman Legacy, so it'll be interesting to see how they move between something targeted at a more general audience in Superman Legacy into their own movie that's probably gonna have a bunch of sex, swearing, and people getting punched in half, so pretty totally opposite of what I think Superman is gonna be. There's a rumor that during their appearance in Superman Legacy, they will be controlled by Amanda Waller. I wouldn't be surprised if she was squeezed into this movie to show the audience Viola Davis is sticking around post-reboot, and to help set up her upcoming Waller TV series. Here, they could have her overseeing the UN-sanctioned Stormwatch version of the group, then using the events of this movie as some inciting incident for them to go rogue and become the Authority. That could be a cool way to build some backdoor excitement for a movie featuring a team that's not all that well known. I just hope it's not given a very large piece of attention in this plot, and I'm trusting that James Gunn is going to stay very focused on Superman and the more Superman-specific characters. That big, fat, full cast makes me a little nervous about that, but I think a lot of those are just going to be fun little cameos. Some other casting news in this DC universe before getting into my picks for the Authority: Lex Luthor has been cast. I won't spend too long on this, but in my last Fancast video, I suggested Dave Bautista for Lex Luthor. I still stand by that would have been a good choice, but it has now been confirmed to be Nicholas Hoult. I think that's an incredible choice. He was wasted as Beast, and I've been eager to see him step into a more complex role in one of these universes. I had never considered him for Lex because I had already suggested him as my Batman for this universe. I'll unpack that more heavily when I eventually fancast the Bat family in a future video. But Lex truly does feel like the better use of his talents. Considering him for both Batman and Lex should really speak to the faith I have in his range. And there is a combination of insecure, condescending, manic genius that is absolutely in Holt's wheelhouse. I was actually so disappointed when he had to drop out of Mission Impossible because I was so excited to see him as a villain. The trio of casting for Superman, Lois, and Lex alone have me so excited for this universe. We also had a casting of Eve Teskmacher. She'll be played by relative newcomer Sarah Sampaio. So the rumor of Eve appearing over Mercy Graves turned out to be true. I totally understand Gunn wanting to give a nod back to Donner by using this character instead of Mercy. I do, however, get to pat myself on the back once again for nailing the casting of Skylar Gisondo as Jimmy Olsen. Getting anything right at all in these videos is very exciting. Getting both Superman and Jimmy right is just elating. I don't care if I get everything else wrong. That's a better batting average than I was expecting. There are 7 characters from the original lineup of the Authority that I would like to take a crack at casting. We actually already have casting news on 1 character. It's unknown how much of the team will appear in Superman Legacy, but we will at least have Angie Spica, the Engineer, also known as the Maker. She will be played by Maria Gabriela de Faria, an actress whose career has largely kept her in Venezuela thus far. She was in the short-lived American series Deadly Class back in 2019, but I never actually saw that one. In Angie's pursuit for a better world, crafting endless numbers of devices meant to aid mankind, Angie eventually replaces her blood with liquefied nanotech. It keeps her alive and also acts as her armor and the conduit through which she synthesizes new creations. Kind of like a mix of Cyborg and Green Lantern. Her powers are only really limited by her imagination. Beyond flight and her metal covering, she can shift into any shape, and she's been shown to fabricate things on the fly, like radio telepathy bugs, rocket thrusters, an assortment of weaponry, altered anatomy to suit new environments, and even cloning herself. Angie is known to be committed to her family and education, but can have a hot-headed temperament. Since becoming the Engineer, she is struggling with the loss of her humanity, wishing she could still live a normal life, but knowing she's willfully given that up. I procrastinated for months during the writers and actors strikes, so I obviously already missed casting Angie, but in my outline before that time, I was leaning towards Adria Arjona, based on her work in Good Omens and Andor. I suppose I can keep her in my back pocket for a future casting instead. Next is the leader of this group, Jenny Sparks, the spirit of the 20th century. An English woman who stopped aging at 20 and is now about 100 years old. She is effectively immortal until the expiry of each century, when she is reborn with a new elemental power. She serves as the reluctant leader of the group, and is the one who first brought them all together. Her leadership style is pragmatic, willing to make tough decisions for the greater good. This responsibility weighs heavily on her, and she doesn't always handle it with much grace. She's often portrayed as a chain-smoking, hard-drinking, sarcastic character. Jenny feels a strong sense of duty towards Earth, and is a natural leader in high-stakes scenarios. But she is often cynical towards other authority figures and general bureaucracy, butting heads with government agencies and other superheroes alike. She is able to control and fight with electricity that she must draw from a power source, as well as manipulation of other forms of energy. This can be used to create shields, electric discharges, and interacting with electronic devices. I found it tough to pick an actress who leans closer to 20, who I think could pull off the jaded edge of someone who has lived much longer. The most popular castings I see for Jenny are always Anya Taylor-Joy, Emma Mackey, and Jodie Comer. I could see any of them pulling it off, and of those 3 I think I would lean most closely to seeing Comer in the role, but I was searching for someone a little less high profile, instead landing on Hermione Corfield. She's 29 right now, but I think can easily play younger. I think she has the look, voice, and confidence needed for this role, and I think there will be something really enjoyable about seeing someone who looks relatively young and sweet being this hardened hero who swears like a trucker. Next is Jack Hawksmoore, the god of the cities. This guy has the power to physically bond with cities, drawing information and powers from them. Yeah, it's as strange as it sounds. This so-called power of city empathy allows him to communicate with, control, and draw strength from cities. Jack can also travel between any major city in only 1 hour, which actually doesn't seem that fast compared to so many other heroes. He's often stoic and reserved, remaining somewhat enigmatic to those around him. Jack's committed to the team and has even used his strategic mind in a leadership role after Jenny. His symbiotic connection with cities affect his worldview and relationships, making him a bit of a loner, although he and the Engineer regularly hook up. And he holds a great respect for Jenny specifically, who gave him a chance and a found family of sorts. He also has enhanced physical abilities that scale up with the city he's in, and generally rapid healing. He occasionally also demonstrates technopathy, allowing him to control technology, but seeing as he's the 3rd person in a row on the list who has that power, I don't think they'll lean on it very heavily. We need someone gritty and tough for the role. Someone who looks like they could hold their own, swinging their fists, but often resorting to murder to stop his enemies. As well as someone who could maybe eventually take on a leadership role in these movies. I think 10 years ago, Vince Vaughn would have been a bold and interesting choice, right when he was trying to break out into more dramatic roles after a comedic career. As of now, I think he's probably aged out of it. My number 1 pick is actually Luke Hemsworth. He's not as strikingly handsome as his brothers, which I think would serve the role well, and he still has the broad build needed for someone like Hawksmoore. And looking at the 3 Hemsworth brothers, I think he's probably the best actor of the 3. I like that even his resting face has a sort of simmering intensity to it. And I think he could really dial into this character to add some key layers to this brooding city slicker. I'm going to look at 2 heroes now. The Midnighter and Apollo together are very much the Batman and Superman of this group. A dark, mysterious, intense man of action, and a handsome, mega-powered classical hero. Both of them were bioengineered to possess their powers and exclusively use their superhero names. Very little is known about them before becoming the Midnighter and Apollo. Back in the year 2000, they were considered the first openly gay couple in comics. Although they don't bicker like Superman and Batman, these two get along super well and are actually a very strong and positive relationship in DC Comics. So I think that'll be a great bit of representation to bring to the world of comic book movies. While you never know if actors will have chemistry until screen testing, I'll aim to cast these two as a pair, preferably played by queer actors. The Midnighter, also known as Night's Bringer of War. He's able to sense the abilities of others in a way that allows him to play out every possible variation of their fight in his head ahead of time, making him nigh untouchable in combat. He has the stealth, attire, and mystique of Batman, but he's an unhinged lunatic, more like Rorschach. So we need an actor who can beat people to a bloody pulp with a grin on his face, but then can also share tender moments with Apollo, all of which is steeped in his own insecurities and reluctance to let anyone get too close. So this actor needs to bring that intensity to both combat and his relationship, leaving room to reel it in for some lighter moments of humanity. Far and away the most common fan casting for the character is Luke Evans, and I think he has the perfect balance needed for the Midnighter. However, I disagree with the most common fan castings I've seen for Apollo, and so I'll be adjusting my pick accordingly, even though I'd be perfectly happy with Evans in the role. So now, Apollo, the Sun King. Much like Superman, Apollo's powers are generated through solar energy. When his batteries are charged, he can fly, he's invulnerable, is incredibly fast and strong, and blasts laser-like solar energy from his mouth and eyes. So yeah, he's basically Superman. As the character exists in the comic, he is a fairly generic Superman archetype, although he never steps into a leadership role. He's not very jokey or sarcastic. He really is primarily the muscle and power behind this group. Beyond that, he basically just needs to fit well alongside our Midnighter. And the most common fan castings I've seen here are either Matt Bomer or Lee Pace. They both check off a lot of the right boxes. I'd be okay with either one really, but I have been obsessed with one actor lately who I think would be perfect for Apollo and is forcing me to completely rethink the casting of both these roles. My number 1 pick for Apollo is Sam Reed. His performance as Lestat in Interview with the Vampire was one of the most layered, complex, and enthralling performances I saw last year. He seamlessly drifts between romance and rage, and has the talent to add something special to a relative blank slate like Apollo. There's a lot of room to embody this role and make it your own. Now casting opposite that pick. Sam Reed is currently 36, so I wanted to cast a Midnighter that stays as close to that age range as I could. And the best match I found is 35-year-old Colton Haynes, who some might recognize as Roy Harper from the CW's Arrow. For starters, he has the jawline to support wearing a mask at nearly all times the way the Midnighter does, and while I don't know much of his roles, from what I've seen, I think he has the physicality and the expressiveness needed in his face to play a character who so deeply lives within their alter ego. being able to go back and forth, bringing those guards up and down, depending whether he's in combat or with his partner. So the two of them together lean a little younger than I had planned, but I'm excited by the potential there. So I'm locking it in. Sam Reed and Colton Haynes make up my top choices for Apollo and the Midnighter. Next we have Shen Min, who goes by Swift and is known as the Winged Huntress. Swift gained her abilities when a passing comet activated a quirk in her otherwise human genetics. She has the ability to fly fast enough to catch some speedsters and has deadly talons. There's even a storyline where she flew through a person, and if this movie is R-rated, as it likely should be, I fully expect that to happen in this movie. But maybe against a bad guy instead of a civilian, as The Boys very recently did a whole storyline on that. While capable in the field and a proficient pilot, which is kind of ironic for someone who can already fly, she is often relied on to provide oversight and tactical coordination for big fights. Shen often remains calm and collected, balancing out some of the other big personalities on the team. She's fighting alongside people who are superpowered gods and immortals, so while she's strong in her own right, she doesn't really stack up to everyone else. Even though she's got a few feathers and some big old talons, Swift is probably among the most human of the team, and through that can be really useful for keeping things grounded. I think Palm Clementif would be a good fit as an actress. She was such a delight as Mantis, and I assume Gunn would be eager to work with her again. And after just seeing her as Paris in the new Mission Impossible, it's raised my confidence that she has the range for a more serious role like this one that still has a little room for her to be playful in. However, Palm is actually half Korean and then a quarter each French and Russian, not Chinese. While that certainly hasn't stopped Hollywood before, I would like to attempt to pick a Chinese actress. I'd be interested to see Chloe Bennett in the role. Nowadays she mostly works as a voice actor, but I imagine many would recognize her as Daisy Johnson or Quake in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's seeming very unlikely they're bringing that character back, maybe Secret Wars, but probably not even then. But I was recently reminded how great she is with her guest role as Robin on Dave. I genuinely think her career was saved when the live-action Powerpuff Girls show got canned. So she has experience acting outside of her element, being a human on a team of superheroes, or as the down-to-earth girlfriend of someone rich and famous. Most of the members of this team tend to be quite dark and depressed, and Chloe Bennett is so often likable and charming. I think if she were to tap into that as the human representation on this team, it could be a really strong, effective juxtaposition of the rest of these mopey sad sacks. So sprinkling someone in with some more positive energy and the vibes of someone you just kinda wanna hang out with could provide a much needed bit of variety within the group. And I think that would be a great inroad for some moments of comedic relief. And rounding out our core 7, Jeroen Thornedike, who goes by the Doctor and is one of the Shaman. The Doctor possesses all the combined knowledge and power of hundreds of previous shaman who have come before. He has magic powers that allow him to mix reality. He's only recently a hero, inheriting this massive amount of knowledge and power when he was chosen as the next shaman following the passing of the previous. The overwhelming nature of this new burden and Jeroen's addictive tendencies actually drive him to become a heroin addict. The newness of it all means he lacks confidence, and combined with his addiction, adds some real fallibility to his otherwise great power. All the previous shamans exist in the Garden of Ancestral Memory, that the Doctor will then visit for counsel. It's very likely at some point we'll see this adapted, as that legacy is a big part of the character, but I don't plan to cast any of the previous shamans at this time. It's hard to really summarize his powers, as his reality warping is often limited only by his imagination, a phrase I've already said in this video. Literally though, he has to picture his intended magic in his mind's eye, described in quote, poetic terms, for the magic to take place. He's been shown to stop time, cause massive destructive forces, can turn any object into any other, and has been told by the previous shamans he technically has the power to undo the entire universe. His powers draw from the earth and can cause great ecological damage in the process. He is both spiritually and emotionally connected to earth and nature, with that balance of wanting to protect earth while harming it when he uses his powers, acting as a bit of a moral governor on what he's capable of. It's a really interesting way to limit the character, knowing he could probably stop anything at any time, but at great cost. Jeroen didn't ask for these powers, they've driven him to drug use, and his heart is constantly aching for both the globe and those on it. This is an average Joe who is crushed by the weight of his powers, yet must persevere to achieve great and magnificent things. He's one of the most interesting characters on the team, so you definitely want to get that casting right. 10 years ago, I would have cast Alan Tudyk in a heartbeat. I love him as an actor, and I think he would have nailed it. And he probably still could. Honestly, being a little older could be an effective way to make the Doctor feel more weary, like he's been aged by the world's troubles. And maybe it would be interesting to have someone on the team who's notably older, while also making the physically oldest one the newest to their powers. There's some really fun ways to play around with that. But assuming they'll want to go a little younger, to add a bit of cohesion to the team in that sense, it's hard to ignore what an obvious choice Domhnall Gleeson is. He's got that slender build, the ability to play meek and distraught, and I generally feel he has the powerhouse talent to bring the agony and sensitivity needed to a character like this. So while I love Tudyk, Gleeson is equally wonderful in anything I've seen, and the Authority would be lucky to have him to round out their team. Now, before completely closing out this video, I'm stepping outside of the Authority casting to add on one more character following the rumored villain of Superman Legacy, Brainiac. I actually love the idea that Lex will be present, but likely not as the villain for this first go-around. It allows this world to still feel full and lived in, without going down the same obvious route that everyone else does with their Superman movies. Plus, having a character like Brainiac in this day and age will offer an incredible opportunity for commentary on AI and the growing concerns of a potential AI doomsday. Brainiac feels long overdue for a live-action big-screen debut. Seeing as they cast the Engineer so early on, she seems likely to have a larger role than most other members of the Authority in Superman Legacy. Maybe they'll make it that she was the creator of Brainiac? Or taking that a step further, that she created him alongside or under the influence of Lex Luthor, with him then hijacking this creation to become the Superman killing android we're familiar with. In early comics, Brainiac was fully an android, so any human appearances or mannerisms were completely manufactured. Having an actor portray that is a tough balance to find. Humanize an android too much, and they become indistinguishable as a robot. Or you start to veer into the more controversial space that Spader had occupied with his very human-like Ultron. A performance I intend to defend in my own upcoming Avengers movie review. Just you wait. But sliding the other direction, if you go too robotic, the character may lack any real memorability, as there won't be as much personality brought to the character. There needs to be a human edge to the character to give him the presence and threatening aura needed to stack up to the likes of Superman. I wanted to remind myself of Corey Burton's performance as Brainiac in the DC animated universe, and it actually took me by surprise how similar the tone and cadence were to James Spader's Ultron.
Most impressive. Your powers even exceed Luthor's description.
Everyone creates the thing they dread. Men of peace create engines of war. Invaders create Avengers.
I apologize for any discomfort, but it was important that I accurately gauge your powers.
That just is how James Spader sounds, so I don't think that was any influence on his portrayal of Ultron, but the similarities there are crazy, right? However, in the New 52, Brainiac did have actual character origins, originally being a person before being Brainiac, which would make him an interesting foil to the Engineer, someone who is directly attempting to become the ultimate machine, compared to our hero, who is trying desperately to cling on to her humanity. Then having Brainiac's cold, algorithmic calculations opposite Superman's glowing optimism, I'm so excited to see this character in action. Ralph Fiennes is easily the most common fan cast. I could see it. Another common pick I saw was Zachary Quinto, but I think that leans more on some typecasting. Between Sylar back in Heroes or Spock, now more recently voicing characters like Lex Luthor or Robot in Invincible, it's pretty clear he has the chops to play an evil, maniacal, robotic humanoid, blending together all those past roles into one. Like, there's no doubt in my mind he would crush it, but I like to try to step outside the obvious just by a toe or two, and instead my top choice is actually Michael C. Hall. We already saw him struggle with his humanity for years as Dexter Morgan, the serial killer. Hall already has a creepy side to his voice, and if we were to see him let loose as a full-on villain, leaning on his talents as a voice actor, which I think hasn't come up nearly enough in his career,
I think my natural voice is kind of creepy.
then I think he could deliver something totally unique and petrifying. Either that or just throw John Malkovich in there. You can't tell me that wouldn't be a fun casting if nothing else.